Welcome to Crying Out Loud. I'm Dr. Laura Berman, and this is your grief companion. Join me to learn how to soften the pain, steady the nervous system, and connect to your loved ones on the other side. None of us were meant to grieve alone, so let's cry out loud together.
So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, I'm shrinking my heart.
On this episode of Crying Out Loud, we're exploring some of life's biggest questions. What happens after we die? Do we choose our families before we're born? Why do some people experience grief so differently than others? And is it possible that the challenges, fears, and even losses we experience in this lifetime are connected to experiences our souls have carried from previous lives? My guest, Ainslie MacLeod, has spent more than 25 years giving psychic readings and helping people understand who they are at a soul level. He's best known for his work with past lives. But unlike many practitioners, Ainslie doesn't use hypnosis or regression for reading past lives. He simply sees. In this conversation, we talk about soul agreements, past lives, grief, suicide, and what Ainslie believes happens when we leave our physical bodies behind. But this conversation is also deeply personal because you know I tend to go there. A few years ago, Ainslie and his wife lost their daughter, India, to suicide. Together, we explore how his spiritual understanding shaped his own grief journey, what he believes about those who die by suicide, and why he feels our loved ones on the other side may be more connected to us than we realize. Whether you're grieving someone you love, curious about the nature of the soul, or simply searching for a little more meaning in life's hardest moments, I think you'll find this conversation both comforting and thought-provoking. Here's my conversation with Ainslie MacLeod. Ainslie, thank you so much for being here, and I'm so excited to talk to you. There's so many directions I want to go, but let's just start with the first question, which is, you, in addition to being a spiritual teacher, and to a large extent, I feel a spiritual activator for people, you really specialize in past life readings. But unlike most people who work with past lives, like Brian Weiss and other people like that, you don't do it through regression or hypnosis like a lot of past life facilitators. So explain to us, to start with, how you work, which is different than most.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I really, really appreciate that very much. And I want to say that the love goes two ways.
Good.
You touched it's actually a new and improved heart. I had some surgery a few years ago. It's a better heart than I had before. So you really touched it when I met you. And I just felt, oh, this is somebody, your soul family. I'm psychic, so I'm able to read these things. So I've been working as a psychic for now about 25 years. What happened when I first began was I didn't quite know which direction it was going in. And I worked with spirits on the other side, and they weren't totally sure. We had to sort of figure it out, really. There's certain things that I experimented with, finding missing people, missing objects. That didn't work for me. It was not something, there's different reasons I didn't want to do any of those things. And so I fell into what was really my passion, which was figuring out who people are and why they're here. And what I found was that very quickly that every session that I did had a past life component, how a past life would come up. And it would explain blocks, fears, limiting beliefs, physical ailments, and so on that we carry from earlier incarnations. So it just became a bigger and bigger focus over time. I remember a client 20 years ago saying to me, okay, I just want to know why I'm here. I don't want to talk about any past life stuff. I want to know, just talk about this life. Well, within 2 minutes, we're talking about past lives because you can't separate them. I've often said that everything about we humans is related, is connected in some way to prior incarnations. Our idiosyncrasies, our tastes in music, food, people, our entire personalities based on what we've done before. We have all these agreements with between people. So it just fascinated me over the years, just developing the ability to connect. You were, by the way, talking about regressions. I do regressions, which is where I can take a group of people into a past life. And if I've got 200 people in a room, it's very hard for me to read each one of them,
Yeah.
obviously. So I would do a regression there. But in fact, when I first started doing this work, I had somebody in my office. It was one of my very earliest sessions. And this person is lying on the couch, and I'm taking her through this very long relaxation. I'm sitting there kind of bored. And then she's lying there going, I think I see a tree. And I'm going, oh, for God's sake, this cannot be my life. Just like, this is way too slow. So I just said, yeah, it's a tree, and there's a house, and there's this guy, and then this happened, and that happened. And I just found it was quicker and actually more effective in a lot of ways for me just to tell people what I was seeing, because I'm already in the zone. And I'm doing now. I'm doing this all the time, so I
Yeah.
can go into somebody's past life just like that, find out what happened. And so what I found very quickly was that it's not just out of curiosity that we look for past lives, but the healing potential is absolutely immense. So I would find that I would be working with somebody, maybe they had chronic pain, and I find an injury. In fact, for most of my career, people aren't coming to me and saying, I have this pain. Can you figure out what it is? It's more like I'll be looking at somebody and saying, "Hey, got any problem with your shoulder?" And they go, oh my gosh, years of dealing with this. And what I found was that I would find an injury, say, and then by just telling somebody, the soul gets it. It hears, oh, that reminds me that it's a past life. I don't have to hold on to that memory anymore. And so people would come back to me with all sorts of healing things like psoriasis, Crohn's, migraines, knee pain. Now, I don't ever sell myself as a healer, and I never want to get anybody's hopes up. But it has been really exciting to see the potential for healing of all sorts. All the physical, emotional things that we carry through. A lot of it's stuff like low self-esteem, or maybe being afraid of being seen, or fear of judgment, or stuff like that. So, and it really
Or
is kind of
phobias,
endless.
probably too.
All phobias are
Yeah.
death-related past life fears. So, for
Yeah.
example, a judgment, that's one I had to deal with. That. I had 30 years or more of a huge fear of public speaking. And then when I wrote my first, or was preparing to write my first book, my spirit guides that I work with, they took me aside and went, well, you can't really publish a book and not be able to talk about it on radio or TV. But I mean, I literally couldn't have done it before.
Oh.
I mean, I would go into a complete panic, sometimes even just in front of two people. And what it was, it all went back to a past life where I was judged and executed. And that's a
Mm.
very common thing with phobias. Like I say, they're death-related fears, and they can shift like that really, really quickly. Sometimes in closed spaces, maybe you went down with a submarine, or something where or often imprisonment, for example. And then over the years, I just I learned to know what to look for. I can reverse engineer it or whatever. If somebody says, I've got a fear of this, well, I know there's going to be something in the past life that would explain it. I know kind of roughly what to look for. And the other way is, if I find a past life and I see that somebody's dealing with such and such a thing, let's say they were persecuted for expressing their opinion, well, they're probably going to have a big problem sending texts and emails, kind of nervous about how they're perceived as they hit send, or they don't, or they want to hide their light because they stood out and got into trouble in a past life.
Yeah.
So the possibilities are absolutely endless, but it's quicker for me to tell somebody rather than to regress them.
Yeah. Well, I
I
thought,
have
yeah, I
no
mean,
patience.
that's right. And I thought that was so funny. I remember when you told me that it's, I don't have the patience to hypnotize people. I'm already getting it all from spirit.
Oh
And I
yeah,
do think a lot of people who work with past life regressions, because you can be trained to do it, don't necessarily have, aren't tapped in and tuned into the guide. So they're just a facilitator and the
Yes.
client is uncovering it for themselves.
Right.
And they may be helping, but in your case, it's like you're already getting the download. So, I get it, not wanting to
Mm.
wait for them to figure it out when you're already seeing the whole picture.
Yeah.
I do believe that. And I have found that myself that, it's what I'm always saying that when things are brought to light, that's when they can kind of evaporate. So I do think that's
Yeah.
really beautiful. And I've had some of those healings myself where when your conscious mind and perhaps your soul too, as you're saying, remember, like realize, oh, this isn't like I can let that go. That isn't this life. That was that life. It like lifts the hold that was there.
Absolutely. The fundamental
Yeah.
problem is that for most people to get through from life number one to life, or to feel like this, the soul's got enough experience, it would take something like, let's say, 120 lifetimes. That would be typical. It's hard to actually, get an exact number. There's a lot of infant mortality in the past and stuff like that, but it would usually be based on lives that at least got started. So roughly, let's say 110, 120. And that's, the number of times that you've had a life, and then at the end of it you go to the astral plane. It's the next closest non-physical dimension to us. You go there to process what you just experienced and plan for the next one and come back in. But the problem is that the soul doesn't die. It's
Mhm.
conscious throughout. So to it, it is just one big long life. And, in the same way that we would look back at something that happened to us 5 years ago, and maybe we get bitten by a dog and we're a little skittish around dogs now, the soul goes back and it's remembering, especially if it has a trigger of some kind, it's remembering some analogous experience from a past life. And then it starts to kind of freak out. It's going to, oh, maybe this thing could happen again. So all we're doing really is reminding the soul that that was then and this is now. And you
Yeah.
just need to have just enough information. You can't just say to the soul, that was then, this is now. They will go,
Yeah.
well, what was then? But you have to have like a little bit of information, like so it can maybe a bit of location, who you were, some of the major experiences, and then it goes, oh right, okay. Thank you for letting me know. I always say it just does it with a whimper, not a bang. It's just kind of, oh, okay,
Okay,
thanks.
let that
So
go.
40-year phobia disappears like that. You know,
Well, I
uh,
think, so this is a beautiful segue into grief and loss, which
yeah,
is, what I really want to focus with you on this idea of first and foremost, the soul being eternal, right? That we live
yeah,
many, many lives. And some of us are here, have had many, many, many lives. That's what you call an older soul. Some are,
right.
you know, haven't had as many lives here yet. But I want to talk about that because one of the things that I talk about a lot in all different capacities is really trying to help especially grievers wrap the way that I explain it in my quantum physics way is that we are pure vibrating atoms. We are all energy. If we were to look at ourselves through an
Yeah,
atomic microscope, we're pure vibrating atoms. And energy, we know it's been proven, cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. And so the vibration, which I sort of, and tell me if I'm totally off base here, but this is what I kind of think of as the essence, the energy, the vibration of our soul, that is eternal. That can't be the casing, it changes form, right? So
right.
our body goes, but the essence of us, our soul self, our soul lives on
Yeah, the
and
true, the
goes
true self.
the true self, yes.
Mhm.
And that is a self that is free of all of our ego and our insecurities and our hangups in this lifetime. That all stays here. And
Yeah.
the essence of us, except maybe some of these injuries from past lives. I don't know. Do we take those with us? Because a lot of the questions I get from grievers are like, let's say someone's child or loved one died in a traumatic way or in a sudden way, or even like in Sammy's case, he was an accident. Is he, as they transition, like I know when he comes back, that may come up, right? In some sort of
Yes.
phobia or whatever, when he comes back in human form. But when he's in soul form, is that a burden that he's carrying in the same way he would carry it in a lifetime? Or is he really in this? Because I imagine them just in this freedom and aliveness and oneness and love on the other side until we come
Yeah,
back into these human forms. But
yeah,
you tell me
yeah.
if I'm right or wrong about that.
I think it's essentially correct. What happens is that we carry the memory of the fear. So we're on the astral plane. We're preparing to come back into the next life. We choose our parents. We choose our circumstances. Very broadly, it's not carved in stone, and it's not every detail. People talk about, oh, they think every single thing is meant to be. It doesn't really work like that. You have a life plan it's a rough outline of all the major things that you want to experience. Interestingly, for grievers, it doesn't include death. It's things like choosing circumstances of your birth to maybe make sure you get an education beyond high school level or something like that. Make sure the family's, a very common thing is for a soul that wants to be a doctor would come into a family of doctors, or if the soul wants to be a
Or do
musician, it
we
will come into a family of musicians.
do we choose family? Because I feel like, and I've also sort of had these moments where when I go into deep meditation and I'm looking at this stuff, even through my own healing, that like this idea, because I want to talk a little bit about soul agreements, which we're segueing into here. I feel like I chose my parents not only for the education I was going to have and whatever else, but to some extent for the growth I wanted to have in this life. Like for me, just as an example, there was abuse in that family that caused a whole cascade of things, and also this lack of spiritual connection. I jokingly but seriously say my dad was God, and he was a really crappy God. He was a mean one, but I didn't have any spiritual connection. So I feel like part of my intention in this lifetime and in choosing that family where I was going to be disconnected from source very quickly, which I was. I was tuned in and tapped in as a little kid, and my family shamed it out of me, teased me out of it, scared me out of it.
Yeah.
And so I just shut that shit down and then had to really consciously reawaken it later in life. And I have felt like on some level, and I even said this to my dad as he was dying, I thanked him for wounding me in all the ways he did, because it was through those wounds that I was forced and pushed to do all of these other things that are so beautiful. So I'm wondering what you have to both about the families we choose, but also extending upon that, because I know everybody is holding this question in their heart. All grievers hold this question, and I have held this question. I really feel like on some level, my soul and Sammy's soul knew that he was going early. Maybe I'm making that up, but and in these communications I've had with him, he's sort of like, I've shared this before, but I asked him recently, like maybe as I was writing this latest book, Sammy, are you supposed to help me write this book? And he said, Mom, I was always supposed to help you write this book. Of course, I'm helping you write this book. So I'm wondering what your take on these kind of, is it generally written in the stars? Is it just bad luck? Like, what is your take on it?
Well, like I say, we've got a life plan. It's contains things like the agreements with the parents. One of the things I hear from clients a lot is when I tell them that you chose your parents, they go, what the heck was I thinking? But when you actually look at, I was raised by an alcoholic, raging father, physically abusive, and all of that, the classic stuff. And I was a super sensitive kid. It's partly why I'm able to do the work. And it was a very, very tough thing to deal with. I don't mean poor me or anything. It was just my spirit guides say all the time is that the experience is not the lesson. The lesson is what you draw from the experience. And no matter how challenging or hard the experience, there's always a positive lesson. And it took me a long time to really get that, because being raised in this environment did for me was that it pushed me within. I was a very, very shy child. I was bullied at home, I was bullied at school. I was, very insecure, very quiet. But I had to read my dad. I had to anticipate his moods and stuff like that. So it actually helped me, and it was years, I mean, decades before I understood this, that it helped me to actually develop some strong intuitive
Yeah.
skills, being able to do that. I've never seen it as that when I was a kid. The other thing was that I had a past life prior to this back in the 1800s. I lived in China as a guy. I became addicted to opium, and my addiction destroyed the family. And so one of the choices that my soul made was to come in where I would learn the other side of the coin. What is it like to be, the child of an addict and have to, deal with all that that entails? The thing about always looking for the positive lesson, I have a real problem with toxic positivity,
Hmm.
especially in the spiritual world. Oh, it's all love and light. Everything's meant to be. It's all la la la. It's like Pollyannish to me. But once you see that there are positive lessons, I mean, even from the worst thing,
Yes.
that we maybe learn the real importance of love. We maybe learn to be more loving towards others or appreciate life or appreciate what we've got. It's hard to find. It's really sometimes very, very hard to find the light in the dark when you've been through something really traumatic, as I think so many people you would work with would. In fact, the same with
Yeah.
me. I work with a lot of people who've dealt with grief. I'd like to just touch on one thing that I think is really interesting is, again, is how past lives play into things like grief,
Hmm.
because we see whatever happens in this life through the lens of the past life fears. And that's why you can get two people who have very similar experience. And I've worked even with twins or siblings where they both have the same experience. And one sees it, maybe it's the abusive father or something, and one sees it all in terms of betrayal and trust issues. The other sees it all in terms of rejection and abandonment, or another one might see it all in terms of self-worth. It all depends really on what gets triggered and what reminders the soul goes back to in the past. And the point there is that we don't always deal with grief the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
We have, but it really does depend a lot on what gets triggered and brought up. In
I've
fact,
never
there's a
thought of it that way. That makes a lot of sense. When I think about the different ways that people experience grief, I often think about it in terms of their past trauma in this life, right? Because I
right,
always say that trauma loves an open door. So the trauma of loss, and I feel like all grief is a form of trauma. How intensely you feel it is different for everyone. But all loss creates a trauma in the system to differing degrees. And depending on your past traumas, and now I'm thinking your past life traumas as well,
right,
you're going to, and how much healing you've done, you're going to carry it very differently, right? And
yeah,
so that's interesting because I've been thinking about it in terms of this life, and now we've got to add in all the past lives
yeah. I
too.
know. You see, it's not to diminish at all what happens in this life, but the
Yeah.
way that I see it is that what happens in this life is a trigger for
Yes.
the pre-existing conditions. So I
Yes.
always think of going back to past lives is like looking for the cause,
Yeah.
and rather than dealing with the symptoms. That's
And so,
a big
what do
difference.
you think about, like, I have always felt that, we have these, and you said this actually, so I think you believe this too, that we're a soul, you and I are members of the same larger soul family, right? That we have these soul groups and soul families, and we
Mhm.
kind of come back maybe not all at the same time all the time, but we tend to find each other, and that feeling you have when you meet, like I had with you, when you meet some,
Right.
or I had with Tina, my friend Tina, when you meet someone and you're like, oh, there you are, I know you, even though you've never met them before, right? There's this soul to soul recognition. I've always felt like, oh, they're part of my soul family, and I certainly feel like the ones in our family, that like we've been traveling around together for a while. And so I wanted you to speak to that, and in particular as it pertains to those we've lost, right? So like I feel like Sammy and I mean, I remember when he was little and my mother died. He must have been in fourth grade, and he and his brother, who was in third grade, were asking me what happens when you die. And I said, look, I don't know. I can tell you what I believe. And my story to them was like, look, we all are souls and we live many lives. And before we came here, this is how I explained it to them. Before we came here, we got together and we said, okay, I'm going to be the mommy. You're going to be the kids. We're going to all come here. We're going to, you chose me because of not only how much I love you, but maybe things that you needed to work on in this life that I'm going to help create for you or make hard for you, whether I intend to or not. But we're all here to kind of grow our souls, and we chose to be here together. And at the end of that conversation, Jackson, my youngest, said, okay, well, when you die, will you wait for me so we can come back again?
Oh,
I know, I didn't bother telling him there is no time. I just said, like, okay, yes. And then Sammy didn't say a word. And then hours later, as I was putting him to bed, he's like, and I've held on to this for so long. And he was only in fourth grade. He's like, I must have not had that much to learn in this life because I chose parents like you, which just like, oh, so those days where I feel like crap about myself that I didn't do a good enough job, I hold on to that. But the reason I'm asking is because my story, and I'm asking you to confirm or deny that from your experience, is that with our loved ones, we do have this soul connection and we came here to have this experience. That doesn't mean that horrible things don't happen, but that
right.
this is all part of our soul's trajectory.
That's absolutely. There's so many things. Yeah, God, could you
There's so
just
many rabbit holes we
book?
could go
Oh, but
down.
could you book me for like a 10-hour session? It's like, I mean, there's so many things I can talk about. I wanted just to go back and address that question of when somebody feels that they may not be here for very long or something. This is not that it's not because of the plan. It's not because of the life. It's in their life plan. Um, it's a form of precognition, and they're
Mm.
actually anticipating something. But and here's the interesting thing too. The people I work with are older souls. They're ones who've had more lifetimes on the physical plane. Young souls are not drawn to the kind of work that I do. Um, I mean, if young souls turn up, they're probably carrying flaming torches and pitchforks. This is not their kind of thing at all. For a lot of the people, you as a very old soul will draw in. You'll be drawing soul family. And there's different ways of looking at soul family as kindred spirits. But you'll be drawing in people who resonate with your message or whatever it is, or however you are approaching it. There's going to be a counselor or helper for all different kinds of people depending on who they are, what stage they're at. But you are going to be drawing in more of those older souls and soul family. People who probably see the world a little bit more through the same kind of lenses as you. And then when it comes to the choice of children, what I found is that older soul parents choose older soul children. Now, sometimes old soul children, when they come back into this life, will choose very young soul parents and the intention here is to try and raise their consciousness. And the typical thing I hear is, usually from somebody who's, maybe coming to a life in Alabama or someplace where, kind of, younger soul part of the world. And they go, well, I don't think I made any difference. And my spirit guides will always say, yeah, you did. You won't know until everybody crosses over. But it does make a big difference to have that more mature, loving kind of energy there. We choose our children, and I have seen so many wonderful variations of this. I put in my first book that I was talking to a client. Her daughter at the time was about 14. She was getting into all sorts of trouble. And I took a look at the situation and I said, oh, well, the big problem is that she used to be your mother. and she is not liking being told what to do. It's very hard sometimes. I have always felt that, you can look at a baby sometimes and you just see that look in their face and they're going, oh God, what am I doing here? And I've got to get through all these years before I can get off and do stuff. So sometimes, souls come in and go, oh gosh, did I really make the
What
right
was I
choice
thinking?
here? What was I
Yeah.
thinking? So this client, she told me about when her daughter was 5 years old. They're having this. It was a very contentious relationship, and they were always arguing. And she said that the little 5 year old, she's kind of looking up at her mom, and she won't give an inch. Because she's not the child, not in her eyes. And finally, she just ends the conversation by saying, "You can't tell me what to do. I used to be your mom." End
Mm,
of conversation. And I hear from, often where people say, "Oh, my little boy said he was 3 years old, and he said when I was in my big body, or
yeah.
when I chose you to be my mommy."
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
hear a lot of that sort of thing.
Yeah, whenever I meet a kid under three or like three or under, because evidently they kind of still are in that place where they have some memory of that for the first until, they get so embedded in this reality. So
Yeah.
I'll say to them whenever I get a chance, do you remember when you were a grown up? And I get the coolest answers in
Yes.
response. Because I do feel like a lot of them remember, and there's so many amazing
Yeah.
stories. There have been, from the University of Virginia where they study past people who remember their past lives. They've done all of this research on children who remember, and then they fact check and they find, oh, he was a pilot. He's saying he was a pilot in World War II, and he's 4 years old, and giving the specifics of the
Hmm.
airplane and the engine and all these things, and who he was, and it turns out to be true. So, like, if you start going down that rabbit hole, it's hard to deny the
Yes.
eternal nature of our souls. But I want to talk a little bit about your story, because not only have you, had your own difficult childhood and you've been doing this work for decades now, but I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago, you
Yeah, just
lost
just over 2 years. Yeah.
2 years ago, your daughter, India,
Yeah.
died by suicide. And, we have lots of people here who have loved ones who have died by suicide. And I was wondering, I mean, obviously, I wanted to get your perspective about how you've moved with your grief journey around child loss, holding it in the context of everything you know from all of your work. And also, if you could speak a little bit to the soul, what you've thought about or what you have to share about suicide, if
Yeah.
anything.
Everybody knows when you go through something like this, why we're all here. It is really hard. I mean, it's the toughest thing. There's something, we just lost my mother-in-law a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of effortless. She had a very smooth exit. I mean, it was really just a month of, a fall, and then just the dementia getting really bad, and she died with my wife and her sister on either side of her, singing Edelweiss, her favorite song. She passed
Mm,
over, and there's very little grief. Of course, we're going to miss her, and it's obviously going to be worse for my wife and her family than it is, of course, for me. But there's a feeling of something having been completed there that's different. If somebody is, she was 94, if somebody's made it that long, there's not a lot of regret. But my gosh, when you lose a child, oh my God, I mean, it's everything, all the dreams, the hopes, everything it just sort of ends in that moment. And it's just, I think it is the worst thing to happen. And, my heart obviously goes out to anybody who's experienced that, and especially with having gone through it myself. India was my stepdaughter, so but we
I
were
don't
very, very
make that
close.
distinction. I mean, I
Neither
know maybe I
the
could, but
Well, the only reason I make the distinction was that what really led to her death at 31 was abuse from her birth father that only came to light very recently, or the worst, fully realizing just what had been going on. She kept it,
mm,
hidden, and
yeah.
but it was real. It was Epstein type level stuff. And so bless her, and she just got to a point where she couldn't deal with it anymore. So, that's the reason I draw the distinction, because when,
Yeah.
especially when people are saying her father abused her, it's going, hey, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
That wasn't you.
I'd like to point out I'm the stepfather. Yeah. So, it's interesting, because having worked with people who've been bereaved and, for so many years, it's not like a main focus of what I do, but it comes up a lot in my work. There were certain things that I became aware of very, very quickly. And now, one of the things that happens, I don't know how common this is. I'm not a grief counselor, whatever. You would have probably, a better idea. But a lot of times, and this goes back to this thing of fears being triggered, a couple will lose a child, and within a year or two, they break up.
Mhm.
They're not able to keep the thing together. And the reason for that is that, of course, one of the major fears that comes up is loss. It can also be rejection, which is why I also feel very compassionate for people who feel kind of some level of anger and resentment, like a sort of
Mhm.
how could you leave me kind of thing. Because it's a very, very valid
Yeah.
emotion.
Yeah.
It can seem illogical, but you're what's happening is that this fear of rejection is being triggered. And rejection and loss, particularly, there are 10 fears. This whole system I use is sort of broken down this way. And there are 10 fears. And these ones are when you lose somebody, I mean, right away, loss and rejection and missing them. The tendency very often is to isolate or
Mhm.
internalize everything. And then you can find it sometimes in a couple, one can't talk about it, or they push the other one away. It's the
Mhm.
effect of the fear. What Christine and I did, um, partly consciously and partly unconsciously, was we made sure to absolutely be there for each other. And talking about, I think you were sort of asking really about how to deal with how to find meaning and so on. For me, it was just my job right now is to support her, to really help her in every sort of way here. A little bit of a feeling of like, yeah, my needs can kind of wait, but for the mama losing her baby, it's just feeling of like and it gives me purpose and so on to be able to do this for her. So I just made sure it was all sorts of things, just like making sure I hold her, giving a physical, emotional affection, and being gentle with her, or the whole thing, just really trying as much as possible to just give her that feeling of love and connection. And it was very much a two-way street, which was lovely. I didn't think we could get much closer. I mean, we are talking a soul family, we're soulmates, and I absolutely adore her. And I think she adores me. I'm pretty sure.
I think she does.
She speaks
Yeah.
fondly of me. And
Yeah.
we were just, I think, we really were. She said it brought us closer. I said, that was possible, but I think it did. Because instead of going that way,
Yeah.
separated or whatever, we really came together.
I think it can go either way, right? As you were saying, I remember when about a week after Sammy died, my husband came to me and said, I know a lot of couples don't make it through this, but we're going to make it. And I said, yes, I think we're going to make it, but I can guarantee you there isn't a cell in my body I don't know who I'm going to be on the other. I know there isn't going to be a cell in my being that is the same. And I don't know who I'm going to become. I hope you like her, but that's
Hmm.
my intention. And you're absolutely right. Being there for each other, but also making space. I have a whole chapter in my new book about your relationship on grief because there's so many things that, first of all, any wounds you have between you are going to be magnified through the trauma of the loss. But also, most of us grieve differently from each other. Like he grieves completely differently than I do, which
Yeah.
usually means compartmentalizing and not thinking about it and not feeling it and
Hmm.
turning it into purpose and whatever, And I had to learn not to make that wrong and just to let him have his process. And when I was emoting and flooding and, decompensating, he had to be able to hold that without losing himself and not abandon me,
Right.
right? Like you were doing for Christine. even though it wasn't how he wanted to grieve, he was able to do whatever he needed to do to not abandon me when I was losing it and needed him.
Well, there's personality differences that will come up in
Yeah.
a situation like that, and we do grieve, all of us, very differently.
Yeah.
And some people grieve right away, and some people it hits them way later.
And is there anything specific to just because of India's journey? And, you know, you and I have talked a little bit about this, but we haven't gone deep into it. Is there anything specific around suicide that you
Oh,
want to
yeah, I'd
share?
love to talk about that. Yeah, I actually wrote a blog post years ago on suicide, and I've had so many comments over the years about how helpful it was, because I was just looking at it from a spiritual point of view, that so much of what we believe about suicide is based on, religious beliefs or what we've been told. And that's something it riles me up. When people say things like, well, they'll just have to come back and go through the same thing again. It's like, well, it doesn't work like that. Or they'll go to hell for doing this. No, they won't. Or how dare they do it, like that lack of compassion. I mean, for somebody to get to that point, life has often just become absolutely unbearable. And there was actually a quote that I got from the spirit guides I work with when I was doing the article. I think it's probably about 10 years old anyway. And
Mm.
and they said that, and I quoted them over and over, since then, because I think it's so important. The universe is endlessly loving, endlessly compassionate, and there is no hatred towards somebody who just couldn't cope anymore. It's just the compassion is always there. The universe is all about love. You talk to anyone who's had a near-death experience, they come back from the other
Hmm.
side. One thing they talk about, whether they had a tunnel or met a being of light or whatever, but they all talk about that feeling of love. Just this
Yeah.
incredible feeling of love, and that's what the universe is all about. So our ultimate goal is souls as well. So there is no karma associated, with a few exceptions. It does sometimes. There might be things to work out. Now, karma is not punishment, by the way. It's just a balancing of things. But maybe if it's a result of somebody's passing, then it has a knock-on effect that affects somebody, maybe their child's uh, future or something, and affects their life plan. Then there might be some karma, but it's not in the sense of punishment. It just means that that person they might be impelled in the next life to maybe do some work with children, maybe to help
Hmm.
them. And also, it's not to say that who's working with children is working through something that they did in a past life or whatever. We're not supposed to know these things, so we don't end up judging anyway. And I think the other thing that I find a lot, and speaking with you and others, and is this search for meaning after you lose somebody. We're trying to find meaning in different ways, and one of the very common ones is to do kind of what you've done or what we've done. We created the India Love Sunflower Foundation.
Hmm.
It's a film festival. Initially, it was the first two that we did were on a mental health topic. We're broadening it more. India was an amazing artist, super
Mm.
creative person, and so we've expanded it to be more about sort of creativity that she was all about. It's brought people together, and also we've tried as much as possible to be as visible when it comes to talking about things like suicide.
Yeah.
Right from the 2 weeks after she passed, we had a celebration of her life, and I began by talking about the importance of talking about abuse, and particularly, I'd already created a program to help victims of narcissistic abuse, but part of my journey is to start helping people who are dealing with all kinds of abuse. It gives me a sense of purpose. It's part of me
Yeah.
healing my own journey and helping others to do the same. But we talk about it. We're open about it
Yeah.
because people need to hear that. And this is one extraordinary thing that happened. It the first time was within 2 days of India's passing. Somebody, a young woman, reached out to Christine, and Christine talked her basically down off the ledge. Somebody who was going to take her own life had read something she posted. She talked to her for a couple of hours, and she said, "I'm turning the car around. I'm going to go and get some help." And over the next just 2 weeks, I think it was a total of 5 young women who were thinking of taking their lives, didn't, because they had conversations with Christine. I look back on it, I still think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah,
They were
that's
so
such a
guided to
beautiful.
talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do think, I mean, I could talk to you forever about this. I want to be sensitive to time. I do think, I love what you're saying about turning, pain into purpose, right? And the
Yeah.
purpose that can grow out of our pain. I always say to people, I know Christine did this just weeks after, India died, and I was going on TV and trying to raise awareness about fentanyl poisoning and social media dangers days after Sammy died. And I've seen her and both of you do this. And I just want to give a shout out to not rushing to purpose, because very often, you were mentioning spiritual bypassing earlier. That's another form of it, right? Is that we
Yeah.
cannot feel our pain and not allow the grief to heal by virtue of making everything about saving someone else, which is meant to be, right? However, that's going to flush out. But I do feel, I just want to give a high five to allowing some grace for the healing before you
So
really fully
important.
step into
Yes.
it.
Yes. There was something that Christine experienced, and she talks a lot about, was that after I think it's probably about 10 days after India's passing, she couldn't sleep, and she was, obviously the stress was enormous. So she went to the doctor and she got some pills, and I forget what they're called, but what she found was that it numbed her out, that she was no longer feeling the grief, but she wasn't feeling any joy either. She was just, it was turning her into a zombie. So she only did that for, I don't know if it was a week, maybe. And what it taught her, she now helps other people with, is that really to get to the other side, you have to go through it.
Amen.
And there's only
Crying
one
out
way through.
loud. There's
Yeah.
only one
Yeah.
way through. You got to feel it to heal it. I am a
Yeah.
huge proponent of that. And that's really where true freedom starts to be found. We do a lot of that. Crying out loud. That's the whole thing. I could go on with you forever. I'm so grateful for your wisdom, your guidance, your insights.
What can I say? One more thing,
Yeah,
actually,
say one more thing.
It might be just helpful that
Yeah.
those on the other side. I'm not a medium, so I don't actually talk to the astral plane, but I talk to another plane of existence. It's all weird, but those who are between lives on the astral plane, they are more aware of the potential for connection than we are here. We're not even sure, God, is there really anything beyond? They're there going, hello, and they're trying to get your attention. And
Yeah.
sometimes they do it in weird ways. So I just always encourage anyone who's lost a loved one, talk
Yes.
to them, just sit down quietly and just, it feels like a monologue, but after a while, you can sometimes start to feel their presence, and maybe you feel like you're getting something back. But really, that's such an important part, I think, of healing, to be able to feel their connection. Ask them to be with you. They may come to you in your dreams, but they want to connect more, I think, than we want to, in a way, because they're more aware of the potential.
Yeah.
Thank you, and sorry to interrupt.
No, that's an important final point. I'm
Mhm.
really glad we ended on this. And where can people find you and follow you and learn more about all your offerings?
Soulworld.com or AinslieMacLeod.com.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Ainslie.
The woman I was before you left didn't make it through, but love is still alive in me and still there between us two. They say just let it be alright, just keep your pain inside, but love this deep and pain this true were never meant to hide. echo of love that resounds, then I will warm you crying out loud. Some days grief's a tsunami. Some days it's just a wave. Some days I'm barely breathing. Some days I feel so brave. But I am learning slowly what the breaking's about. The only way to freedom is feeling it out. Every tear that hits the ground is not a sign I'm weak. It's the sound